Okay, I would like to call to order the special city council meeting of Monday, July 10th to order. And first on the agenda, we have approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. And so the first thing we will do is have public comment, and this public comment would be things that are not related to our hearing. Is there anyone that would like to make public comment that doesn't pertain to the hearing for this evening? Is there anyone online? Okay, we'll go ahead and go on. Tonight, we have a public hearing on the approval of a type 1 development permit in conjunction with a building permit. This is a public hearing regarding the approval of a type 1 development permit in conjunction with the building permit 164-22000006 DWL for the development of a new residence and accompanied access development under the provisions of chapter 17.92.010 of the Cannon Beach Municipal Code. The applicant is requesting to construct a new single-family residential structure with a driveway extension over the Nenana Avenue right-of-way servicing the residence. The development permit was originally approved by a staff decision in March 2022. And that decision has been remanded by LUBA for the city to hold a hearing and make a new decision. So I'm going to open the public hearing. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the city council to hear this matter at this time? Does any counselor believe he or she has a personal bias to declare? Does any counselor believe he or she has a conflict of interest?
Nope.
Has any counselor made any ex parte contacts or a site visit?
Site visit.
Site visit.
Site visit.
Site visit. Is there any additional correspondence?
So there was a large amount of new material that came in at the end of last week and particularly today. And that has all been posted to the website that was identified in the staff report and that the city council was aware of. And so that is the new material. I think the last one came in about 5:30 or so. So there is a fair amount of additional correspondence.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to request the staff report.
Mayor, staff, as you know, this is an application that's been around for a little while. It's been up and down, including the LUBA, and with the changeover in staff, the planning director asked me to do the staff report because of my familiarity and more awareness of this. So I'm going to go ahead and give the staff report instead of Steve this evening. So what we've got, as you indicated, DP number 2206, and this is a LUBA remand of the Roberts residence. It's an application seeks approval of a residence and accompanied access. The application was filed August 3rd, 2021. It's approved administratively March 21st, 2022, appealed to LUBA, and then remanded to the city on March 16th. LUBA remanded on procedural grounds, said the city had not provided proper notice of decision, required the city to allow an appeal and to hold a de novo hearing that was open to any new evidence and any new issues. And so that is what the council is doing now. If you recall, we had a meeting of, I believe it's in May, where the council decided rather than send it back to planning commission that we would just hold the hearing that because it would eventually come up here anyway. So staff report required the city staff review of the application, the evidence with recommendation. Council then opened the record for testimony and argument as follows: the applicant's presentation, testimony in favor of the approval, testimony in opposition, and final applicant rebuttal. As I indicated, there was a fair amount of new evidence that came in today, and you'll also hear some this evening. So I think the expectation is that tonight to listen and absorb the evidence. And if we close the hearing, we'll do that. But also any party may request a continuance or keep the record open. If a request made, council should note it, continue hearing testimony, and when the testimony is complete, we will discuss that. In addition, there's a new statute. If city council concludes the application is not consistent with the land use regulations prior to the final decision, this council must allow the applicant to propose amendments or conditions that would address those issues. And the city can extend the 120-day time limit for decisions to allow them to make that approval. So that's sort of the process. Right? Again, listen, absorb, and we'd come back for any deliberations and decision. So what are we talking about here? The application seeks to locate a new residence on property located off the undeveloped Nenana right-of-way. If you can see, Nenana is the street that runs east-west in this thing in this image and bisects the north part of the S-curves. The Roberts property is the one just to the north. You can see the cursor hovering over right now. It is considered an oceanfront lot as defined in the code, so it's subject to the oceanfront setback. The proposal includes a single-family residence as well as one of two options: an elevated roadway built to city street standards or an at-grade driveway. The image in this slide is the at-grade driveway. So now we'll go through the criteria that are applicable to this application. The property is zoned residential lower density RL, which has a 10,000 square foot minimum lot size. The lot itself is only about 5,400 square feet below the minimum lot size, but the code has a provision 1782-020 dealing with non-conforming lots that are smaller than the required lot size and allows for the development of a single family home only. So the use is an allowed use in the zone. Zone also has requires certain yards, also known as setbacks. On the front yard is 15 feet, the side yards are 5 feet, and the rear is 15 feet. Additionally, it's an oceanfront lot, and so it must comply with the oceanfront setback found in the oceanfront zone. The residence itself meets all required yards, as well as a height limit and lot coverage and FAR requirements. However, as discussed later, there are other structures in the required yard that present some issues. So the first thing I want to talk about is the oceanfront setback in 1742-050A6. This was part of what went to the Court of Appeals, and they said that this was a clear and objective standard and one that was the basis for denying the earlier application on this lot. It requires the use of nearby structures to determine the setback line. And the material submitted by the applicant identifies that line. It's the one going more or less north to south with a little bit of a slant. And if you'll notice, that bottom portion crosses over the drive and continues on into Nenana Avenue. And that at-grade driveway includes a significant retaining wall and which is a structure in the oceanfront setback. In addition, this is a drawing that was submitted. They don't, the record, as I understand it, doesn't have a drawing that specifically provides the oceanfront setback as it applies to the elevated roadway, but it's pretty clear from what staff was able to review that it also has portions in the oceanfront setback, both on the lot and Nenana Avenue right of way. 420609 allows only certain structures within the oceanfront setback, only fences, decks, and beach access stairs, elevated roadways, and retaining walls to support a driveway are not identified as allowed structures. Additionally, oceanfront setback continues across the Nenana Avenue right away. Both the elevated roadway and at-grade driveway would be located at least partially within the oceanfront setback. Moving on from the setback, this is with also subject to the geologic hazard requirements. In 1750-040 requires the applicant to provide a geologic site investigation report that must show either that there is actually a typo in this. It must show either that there is no hazard at the site, not that there is a hazard. So you either have to show there is a hazard at the site or that the hazard can be eliminated or minimized through specific engineering construction methods. The material submitted by the applicant as well as the city's consulting engineers both make it clear that there is a hazard at the site. The applicant has provided reports that are purported to show that these hazards can be eliminated or minimized. CEDA's geotechnical expert reviewed the plans and found that this wasn't met, that in fact the engineering construction methods would not eliminate or minimize the hazard. The city's civil engineer is available tonight if you have questions specifically about those things. And, but not a presentation, the report was submitted with the staff report. So what are they talking about? The area is located in an area of active slide, as the S curves, and that involves where the, the city and these S curves on Hemlock, where it makes its way down from the bluff down lower, and that is a slide that is pushing out to the ocean. City installed horizontal drains in 2007 that have reduced but haven't stopped the land movement. On the last 3 occasions, the last 12 years, there have been significant ground movements following rainfall events. And so when the city's consulting engineers look at it, the geotechnical engineer indicated that there were no engineered drawings or any slope stability analysis submitted for the at-grade driveway. So they were not able to make any conclusions about whether they had met that requirement and that the applicant hadn't met their burden. Regarding the elevated roadway, the city's geotechnical engineer indicated that the elevated roadway will actually reduce the factor of safety for the site. And you'll see this in some of the reports. It's abbreviated FS. And the geotechnical engineer basically says, that a factor of safety of 1.3 for existing infrastructure is generally okay, but that the 1.5 is preferable. And that this elevated roadway will actually reduce the factor of safety. The applicant's geotechnical engineer indicates that although there is reduction, it is insignificant. And I hear from the applicant further about that. Regarding the residents, the city's geotechnical engineer concluded the hazard was not reduced or minimized. Shallow landsliding had been addressed, but not the deep-seated landslide. What he means by that is if you look at the image there are smaller landslides at the front, and that the underpinning at the ocean is to the left of that image, and Hemlock is up at the right, and that there's landsliding at the toe of the landslide, and that the structure that the applicant proposes to build will address those shallow landslides, but they have not addressed the deeper landslide, which is that large brown block that continues to move. And that is where the city's geotechnical expert says they have not minimized or eliminated the hazard. So moving, as I mentioned, if you have questions about that, the city's engineer is available, and you may get presentations from the applicant as well. Moving on to the next topic, accessory structure. This gets back to the ocean yard. That 1754-03 regulates accessory uses and structures. There's a deck to the west of the residence allowed in the ocean yard, and that is allowed as an accessory structure as long as it's below 3 feet. But the other structures in the ocean yard are not allowed, including the staircase with the elevated roadway, retaining wall, and driveway with the at-grade driveway. 1762, chapter 1762 governs grading, erosion, and sediment control, and the application can meet that requirement and can meet the requirement of that section with conditions of approval. 1770 governs tree removal and allows removal of trees in order to construct a structure, including required vehicular and utility access. It's 17 trees that are all required if the development was being built as proposed. 1778 requires the applicant to provide 2 off-street parking spaces, and those spaces have been provided. 1782-020 allows single-family residents to be constructed on lots that don't meet the minimum lot size. We mentioned this earlier, and so the lot size is not an issue. 1790.020 requires every lot to abut a street, and a street is defined by the code to mean the entire width between the right-of-way lines of every way for vehicular and pedestrian traffic. You know, Nenana Avenue has not been improved for vehicular and pedestrian traffic. It's an unimproved right-of-way. One access proposal is to improve the Nenana to city street standards, but to meet that, the street itself would be elevated 20 feet, approximately 20 feet above the current grade, meaning the street and the house don't quite meet, and the problem with whether those are in fact abutting. So it's a significant vertical discontinuity in the surface of the lot and the street. You can see the blue line is where the street, the elevated roadway would go, and the grade is below that at the end as much as 20 feet. Moving on to other criteria, 1790-030 requires the beach access, none is there, so no removal is being proposed. 1790-004 requires clear vision areas for intersection street. We've got a report from the applicant's traffic engineer indicating that standards can be met so long as access slope is not greater than 4.8%, except for certain turning movements, and essentially taking a left turn out of the driveway or a left turn coming from the south, a left turn into the driveway. Both of those present problems. So to the extent you decide to approve, we would recommend conditions that would prevent left in, make it only right in. 1790-065 requires inclusion of at least 2 architectural design element. Application includes a deck with railings and a covered entry, meeting the requirements of this section. So the proposal does meet many of the city's requirements. However, it doesn't meet several criteria. Particularly, they have structures in the ocean yard. They violate the oceanfront setback. They haven't properly addressed geologic hazard, and they haven't adequately demonstrated access requirements. And so staff has recommended denial of the application. And so staff, including Mr. Sokolowski and the city's engineer, are available for questions if you have any. I know that there's, as we mentioned before, a lot of material that you haven't had an opportunity to read. So I'm happy to answer questions, or you know else.
Council have questions at this point? Okay, thank you, Bill. Okay, so I'm going to call for public testimony and state this application will be reviewed against the criteria found in the following portions of the municipal code: 17.10 RL zone, 17.42 oceanfront management zone, 17.5 geologic hazards, 17.54 accessory uses generally, 17.62 grading, erosion and sediment control, 17.7 tree removal and protection, 1778 off-street parking, 1782 non-conforming lots, uses and structures, 17.88 public deliberations and hearings, 17.9 general requirements, and 17.92 administrative provisions. This hearing is the initial evidentiary hearing and will be de novo. Any and all new evidence and testimony will be allowed. Staff report has been prepared for tonight's hearing that identifies and analyzes the applicable criteria. Number 2, testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward those criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or municipal codes which you believe apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the city and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed condition of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue will preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional testimony, arguments, or evidence regarding the application. City Council shall grant such requests by continuing the public hearing or leaving the record open for additional written testimony, arguments, or evidence. Persons who testify shall first receive recognition from the mayor, state their full name and mailing address, and if appearing in a representative capacity, identify whom they represent. I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak this evening. And so first, we're going to talk about some limits to the testimony. So I'm first going to ask the applicant how long they would expect their presentation to be.
Hello, Wendy Kellington for the applicant. I think 20 minutes ought to do it.
That sounds great. Good job. Then I'm going to ask the primary opponent how long they expect their presentation to be.
Hello, Will Rasmussen here for Haystack Rock LLC. We will likewise limit it to 20 minutes, if that works for council.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. For other proponents and opponents, we'll ask people aim for 3 minutes, being respectful and kind. That goes for both of you too. And but if you need more, 5 minutes is the maximum. To the extent several people have the same comment, feel free to appoint a person to speak to represent you. If someone else has already said exactly what you wanted to say, it's fine if you just come up and agree with them. Okay. Are there any questions on any of that? Okay, so is there a presentation by the applicant?
Yes,
Thank you.
my name is Wendy Kellington. I am an attorney with the Kellington Law Group. Our address is 4500 Cruz Way, Suite 4500 in Lake Oswego, Oregon. I represent the applicants Rebecca and Stanley Roberts. I also have the other members of the consultant team here with me. They are available for questions. We have the project architect, the traffic engineer, as well as consulting geologic engineer. To the extent that you want to ask them any questions, the only people who plan to speak tonight are myself, Don Rondema, who is our geotechnical expert, as well as our traffic engineer. So I will begin. And with regard to the planning director's approval decision, he got it right. And he reflects the proper interpretations of the city's code that has followed this saga for the last 4 years with respect to the interpretation of when a road is a road and a lot is a lot, with regard to the ocean yard, with regard to the interpretation of the geologic standards. And the new staff report was quite a surprise when I received it about 7 days ago, which reflected new interpretations of the city code that were 180 degrees different from interpretations of the city's code that are reflected in final decisions of this council, as well as decisions of other members of the city's professional staff, as well as in one respect, LUBA. And there is a principle that is embodied in state law that says the applicant is entitled to the application of the standards and criteria that are in effect at the time that they submit their application. In a case that actually comes out of Cannon Beach, Holland versus City of Cannon Beach, cited in materials I submitted to you today, explains that the city council errs in changing its interpretation from one that had been applied for a particular applicant or property to a different interpretation of the code. And what the Court of Appeals has said is that once a city adopts an official interpretation, and even in Holland, there were some unofficial ones, adopts interpretations of the code, the applicant is entitled to have those interpretations of the code follow them throughout the process. And that applies here. So let's start with the Ocean Yard setback argument that staff newly makes, to the great surprise, I think, of all of us, that the road and its necessary structures to include the retaining walls are actually in the Ocean Yard. Now, that can't be, because what Luba said in repeating the city council's decision in 2021 is that the city found that a lot is distinct from right of way or street as those terms are used in this Cannon Beach Municipal Code. I didn't make that up. That's what Luba said. That's what Luba repeated, that the city council has already found with regard to the definition of the ocean setback and the Ocean Yard. And that really shouldn't be very surprising, because a cursory glance at the definition of a yard, of which the Ocean Yard is one, is that it means an open space on a lot, which is unobstructed from the ground upward, except as otherwise provided in this title. Well, Nenana's right-of-way is not a lot, and we've already plowed that ground. The city council has decided, and Luba has affirmed that in written parts of its 2021 decision, so at page 25, that expressly says that a right-of-way is not a lot. So this business about the parts of Nenana Avenue that will be improved to serve the Roberts' home can't be approved because they're in an Ocean Yard is hogwash. It's an interpretation that's not only a violation of the no change in the goalpost standards, but it's also a violation of the city's own code that says a lot doesn't include a right-of-way. We've already plowed that ground. We're done with that. So Nenana right-of-way and the Roberts home cannot be denied, because there is, on the basis of the right-of-way being in an ocean setback. That's simply wrong. That can't be applied. And then we have the geotechnical interpretation of or the interpretation by the city of the geotechnical standards in the city's code. Now, remember, what the city's code says is that what you need to do as an applicant is to demonstrate construction feasibility, quote unquote, construction feasibility. And you can do that in one of two ways. You show that you absolutely eliminate the hazard, which here is absolutely impossible, because the landslide affects a big chunk of the city, all of the S-curves and the land around it, which affects dozens of homes in Hemlock Avenue. Or you can minimize the hazard to a quote unquote acceptable level. Well, of course, before the January 3rd staff report and its supporting consultant reports, these same consultants and the planning director and a variety of other people in the city made a determination that the hazard had been mitigated to an acceptable, minimized to an acceptable level. And let's talk about what those are. So in the Pally report from May of 2022, Pally sang a different tune, and I submitted that report to you amongst the 21 exhibits I submitted to you. And what Pally said is that what the Roberts ought to do is, with regard to the Nenana Avenue improvements, is to make sure that the driveway has a factor of safety that doesn't change. Well, guess what? As Don Rondema will testify, because he's the smart guy on these topics, the factor of safety for the design of Nenana's private driveway doesn't change with the private driveway from what it is right now. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Pally has said that the factor of safety, that is what you need to apply for the residents, is a 1.3 factor of safety. Well, the evidence in the record is that there's a June 2020 Rondema report that explains that the foundation system for the original house will not only meet the factor of safety for the property, but will increase it, will make it better, and will meet that 1.3 factor of safety, as Don Rondema will explain. The proposed smaller house uses the same foundation system that Don Rondema was talking about. And that was one of the bases upon which, I'm sure, the planning director approved the application, because you didn't see any conclusion that the city's consulting engineers had decided that the factor of safety for the house was inadequate, and so somehow the planning director needed to deny. No, instead, he approved the proposal on the contrary basis of the reports that he had at the time, where not only it was Don Rondema, but it was the city's consulting engineers that said the factor of safety is fine. And so the evidence in the record really only shows that the factor of safety for both Nanana's driveway as well as for the house has been minimized to an acceptable level. The interpretation of the code that is now being peddled by the most recent staff report and its supporting consulting engineering reports take really just a different interpretation of what it means to mitigate to an acceptable level. Again, as Don Rondema will explain, the Pally engineering report in Windsor, and then by that, the staff report now wants to take the position that really what you have to do in order to minimize a hazard to an acceptable level is just to get rid of the whole hazard. And so for the Roberts 1,200 square foot house proposal to be minimized to an acceptable level, they've got to show that they've stabilized the entire S curves and all the area around it in order to get to yes. Well, that's not a plausible interpretation of the code. It's not one the city has ever applied. In fact, there's a house that's being constructed right now, 124 Nazina Avenue, a brand new house, approved lickety split, no fancy reports. There's not even a site investigation that anyone can find. I don't think there is one for that house that's approved. And I've shown in the record where it's on a very, very steep slope on Nazina, really at the worst part of the S curves. And it didn't have to produce that it has, minimized the hazard for everybody. They certainly didn't minimize it for the Roberts. And yet a different interpretation of the code than was applied for 124 Nazina is attempting to be applied to the Roberts now. And that's simply not okay. It's not okay for a lot of reasons, but also as a matter of state law. Again, that 227-178 subsection 3 that says you can't change the goalposts. And the interpretation of that standard, minimize the hazard standard that has been applied to the Roberts and apparently everyone else, is have you minimized it for your property, for your proposal? And the only evidence in the record here is that the Roberts have done exactly that. There's no staircase in any Ocean Yard. And to the extent that someone thinks there is one, we're happy to take a condition of approval that says there won't be a staircase in the Ocean Yard. I'm frankly not sure where that comes from. We've already talked about the retaining wall for the road. That doesn't count. The Ocean Yard only applies to lots. This idea that has been floated in the staff report that a street has to be improved in order to be a street adds words to the city's express definition of what it means to be a street that isn't there. The city's own definition of a yard says a yard is an open space a street is the amount of right of way that is between the described points. There's nothing and is available for pedestrian or vehicular access. There is nothing about the city's definition of a street that remotely suggests that it has to be improved. And regardless, this street, the Nenana right-of-way, is dedicated to the public for only street purposes, for road access purposes. That's all it can be used for. And in fact, the undisputed evidence in the record is that's exactly how the city is using it right now to get to its dewatering pipes and to get down to Inspiration Point and do one thing or another. So this idea that Nenana is not a street lacks any support, I mean, anywhere, including it's inconsistent with the express text of your code, its purpose, its policy. It adds words. The word improved, you don't see the word improved then there anywhere. The plain fact is, it really kind of looks like the staff report was working really hard to find a basis to deny. And I don't know what that's about. I want to remind you that this is a subdivision lot in a city that's zoned residential. And you're on the basis that this new staff report wants to deny, your planning director and lots of folks who've gone before him, including yourself, have determined that the denial bases are not denial bases at all. And the apparent pretext is really inconsistent with who you are and I think who you want to be. I know there's a lot of political pressure. There's a lot of folks who've been told a lot of untrue things about what the Roberts want to do. And so I want to reinforce, all they want to do is build a house. It's about 1,200 square feet and improve an access that exists in a public street to get to it. They'll do it to a public road, which your city planning director has already approved based on the consulting engineering reports that say it's fine, it meets all the standards, or they'll do a private driveway, which other folks have in the city. If that's more comfortable, it's certainly not as intrusive looking, but there's nothing about what they propose that will create the sort of parade of horribles that some of the people involved in this matter have been trying to make people think. So with that, I haven't left Dawn a lot of time, but Dawn, I'd like you to talk. I'm not going to say anything else except in rebuttal. Thank you. Dawn, are you?
Mr. Rondema can raise his hand, or he's here in person.
Hi.
I'm Don Rondema, a geotechnical engineer for the applicant, 20978 South Springwater Road, Estacada, Oregon 97023. I'm here to give testimony again for the applicant with regard to stability comments. I've been working on the S-curves since the late 90s, evaluating its stability and did the design for the dewatering of the S-curves, and have also been involved in tax lot 600, the Roberts lot, for years. The main items that I want to talk about that came up in the report, the staff report and the sub-consulting letters are the driveway and discussed a little bit earlier. We analyzed cross sections of stability through the S-curves and the Nenana right-of-way for several different scenarios of the driveway. An elevated proposal that would use lightweight foam block and an at-grade proposal also. The most recent analysis I did for the at-grade proposal was to evaluate if we could keep the factor safety the same. The previous elevated roadway dropped the factor safety by 0.9%, which is well within any tolerable or tolerance of error. But to get it to 0.0%, we can still do that with an at-grade roadway. Any fills that we have, we can use EPS clock. Any weight to the pavement on top, we can compensate by removing a little bit of soil below it, maybe a foot of soil, that sort of thing. So that can be addressed. The other thing we've addressed is the house stability. Talked about factor safety on the lot, greater than 1.3 for oceanfront stability. That's a system that you saw in a sketch earlier presented by design for battered piles that go below the beach level into the massive siltstone below the slide. The other issue that came up is, and I think Wendy put this properly, is minimizing hazards to an acceptable level. So there have been a lot of improvements to Hemlock Street in particular since the horizontal drains have been put in. Those drains reduced the movement in the slide, didn't eliminate it. People say that I've heard the word significant movement still occurs. Well, significant movement is a nebulous term. So the movement has been 0.2 to 0.1 inches in episodic periods of about 3 to 5 years each. Many winters it doesn't move at all. Some winters it'll move 1/10 of an inch down at a depth of 30 to 50 feet below the slide. And we measure that with instruments that are in place. So it is in fact still budging slightly, but certainly not moving enough to have damaged the roadway or the city force main or the new water line that goes through there, or many existing houses that have benefited from the city's work. Wanted to mention again that the factor safety on the house stability applies to both scenarios of the house, the larger footprint and then the small house footprint. So that doesn't change the analysis at all. The horizontal drains that underlie a lot of the S curves will not be impacted at all by the improvements in the right of way, and there are no drains under the lot itself. So that's a non-issue from our perspective. There's a question about whether collecting water from some of the mid-slope drains, there's a cluster of 4 upslope, and routing it further downslope would be a hazard. It is not. In fact, it's a benefit. It removes the possibility or reduces the possibility that that water coming out of those mid-slope drains could actually seep back down into the groundwater. So it's being collected to one point, taken further in the slope where it can actually be surface water instead. And there are a few other questions that talked about vegetation removal that's proposed, and that has no impact on the stability of the lot itself. Again, the lot has a stability system in place. The S curves is the lot itself is less than 1% of the size of the S curves slide. So it's a tiny little postage stamp on an existing slide that's budging essentially. And I think that covers most of the items that I wanted to discuss, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
She's muted if she's talking.
Oh, Wendy.
I'm sorry, we have about 120 seconds worth of traffic engineer who's on Zoom, who will just briefly summarize his remarks if you'll indulge us.
Thank you.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, my name is Chris Clemo. My business address is 2237 Northwest Torrey Pines Drive, Bend, Oregon 97703. I'm speaking in favor of this development. We've previously submitted materials into the public record, 4 previous documents and then 1 with this go around, and discussing or addressing site distance. I mean, one of the issues you're painfully aware of here is, we have a subdivision that was platted in the late 1800s that didn't give consideration to topography. And then the Old Coast Highway, which is now Hemlock Street, was constructed through the middle of it in a circuitous manner following the contour lines. And so we're kind of ended up with, these streets such as Nenana that really are difficult now to improve to a standard that in this case, meet site distance. We have worked on this extensively on the Roberts property and have shown in our previous analysis that we can mitigate the impacts to essentially to provide adequate safety. The mitigation that we're proposing for this was installation of warning signs in the northbound direction on Hemlock for the indicating of a reverse curve and a tick mark for the driveway. And then also we could do signs in the northbound direction, indicating a hidden driveway with flashing amber lights. The reason we bring up the signs as the mitigation, and this gets at kind of the condition of approval that was put forth in the recent July 10th staff report from the for the public hearing here, stated that the access shall be restricted to right in, right out to ensure sight distance standards are met. In all honesty here, trying to put a barrier out there on Hemlock or in Nenana to prevent left turns, it's either going to result in a pork chop type island in Nenana or a median barrier in Hemlock. I mean, those are really the only two ways to actually prevent a movement. And I guess I would argue that it's not really practical to construct either of these barriers. And probably even more important to point out that these barriers don't exist anywhere in Cannon Beach along Hemlock or the accesses. And there's multiple access points here, even nearby. And I mean, on Gagonia, Nizina, Vista Del Mar, and then an even unnamed access there is address 2175, immediately north of Vista Del Mar. All four of those have less sight distance than what we're talking about here at our proposed access. And there is no documented safety deficiency at any of them. And so I would argue that frankly, we wouldn't need to do anything at our access and still it would operate in a safe and efficient manner. But what we are proposing to do is the installation of signing. And I would also suggest that if you do install signing along this road, that you consider, you know, those other access points and possibly even locate some of that signing further to the south, because again, there are a number of existing access points out there with a lot less sight distance than what we're talking about here. So that's what I need. I'm trying to hustle this along here.
That's good. That's good, Chris. Thank you.
So I'll let it go at that and answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. That does it for the applicant until rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are there presentations by proponents? Anybody online? Okay. Are there presentations by opponents? Well,
Yeah, I got one.
okay, thank you.
I don't know if it counts as a presentation, but I was hoping to comment. I'm starting my 20-minute timer and I'm pretty sure I'll stick to that. Thank you, counselors, mayor. I'm Will Rasmussen from Miller Nash on behalf of Haystack Rock LLC. Address is 111 Southwest 5th Avenue, Suite 3400. I apologize for not being there in person today after all of these years. I am plugging in remotely from my sabbatical. This is the only case I'm doing it for because this case really matters to Oregon and to the community. I'm down here in the Blue Mountains, just southeast of Sydney, and it's stunningly beautiful here. But having just seen it, I can tell you it doesn't have anything on Cannon Beach, on Haystack Rock, on the temperate forest sprouting out of town with its village character and rocky landscape of the North Oregon coast. And there is, I'm just here in opposition to this proposal for a bunch of reasons, which the council has heard of before. I'm going to try to keep it tight today, but I'm here in support of the city's code. You know, the only thing that protects special places like the Blue Mountains and Cannon Beach from degradation and destruction is the faithful application of laws by local officials like yourself. Fortunately, Cannon Beach has a very strong tradition of that. For over 50 years, it's had elected council members that have diligently applied its code, you know, not denying everything, but just requiring applicants meet your code criteria. And I respectfully submit the council should deny the Robert application for two simple reasons. First, the applicants failed to satisfy several code criteria that have been outlined by city staff in the staff report, and a few more outlined by Haystack Rock in the submittals that we've made over the last several weeks in this matter. And second, that applicants failed to address very legitimate hazards, safety concerns raised by the public, raised by neighbors, and raised by experts in the record, the city's own experts and experts retained to analyze this from Haystack Rock LLC. Regarding the failing to comply with the code, specifically as staff outlines in its staff report, this proposal doesn't meet the oceanfront setback requirements, and it doesn't meet access requirements. And I submit, in addition to that, it doesn't meet several provisions of the tree code, as I'll discuss in a little bit. As with all land use reviews, the council's job here is just to review the application materials provided by the applicant and determine whether they meet all applicable criteria. Nothing more, nothing less. I feel like in several aspects, applicants have tried to push false choices on this council regarding various access proposals and saying, just pick the one that complies the most with the code. That's not really the job here. It's just to assess the materials and say whether they actually meet all code criteria. And I think it's pretty clear they don't. For access, applicants say they submit two applications, two proposals. One, the original flying bridge proposal, which was denied by council, denied by LUBA, denied by the Court of Appeals for violating the oceanfront setback. And then second, a 2021 proposal for an elevated driveway concept. That's sometimes called an at-grade driveway, but it's not that. It's still elevated. It points over 10 feet up in the air on fill with retaining walls. The original proposal that was denied and upheld on appeal would have connected to that prior house about 15 feet up in the air. It cannot connect and provide access down at grade where this current house is proposed. So that design is an opposite and is not a real option for the council. The elevated driveway concept more recently submitted omitted basic application materials. It did not provide a definitive site plan, construction drawings, engineering reports or calculations. Even with this kind of last minute dump of information that came in today, we still don't know how much that proposal would weigh, how much weight it would add to Nenana. We don't know, there's no weight for how much concrete is necessary for the retaining walls, asphalt for the drive surface, these foam things that Mr. Rondema talks about. We just don't have real application materials because they were never submitted. And I would say an application was not really made for that driveway. I don't think the council is in a position to say that applicants have met their burden to demonstrate that that is functional access as required by the code. And Mr. Kabisman talked a little bit about the code and how access is required. He talked about code section 17.90.020, which is entitled access requirement. It's pretty straightforward. Ms. Kellington suggested that this is a novel thing for the city to require actual access to a development site. I've been doing projects in Cannon Beach for over 10 years. I've never seen a proposal move forward without actual access. So I'm not sure where that is coming from. And also it's just clear from the context of other sections of the code, like 17.78.030 that requires 2 on-site parking spaces and requires a minimum number of access points to allow the property to accommodate the anticipated traffic, that the code requires what you would anticipate, which is normal vehicular access. This is not a burden that the city has to bear. The city doesn't have to prove that access can't be provided. It's applicants' obligation to show how access is proposed, how it will be provided, and how it will comply with the code. So it's kind of put the city in a very uncomfortable spot of trying to guess what is actually proposed here. And as the engineering report, both civil and geotechnical, submitted by the city shows, and an equivalent geotechnical report from my client shows, applicant has not met its burden of proof to show access compliant with the code. Secondly, regarding the oceanfront management overlay, again, I think Mr. Kabisman did a good job summarizing this requirement. It's exactly what was litigated before in the first proposal from applicants and upheld on appeal, that oceanfront setback line is a clear and objective criteria that applicants must comply with. I I read the city council's prior decision denying the prior proposal for non-compliance with the oceanfront setback as applying to both the house and the driveway improvements, or at that time, the flying bridge. The argument you heard from Ms. Kellington that somehow that decision and Luba's opinion upholding that decision means that the city doesn't apply the oceanfront setback in the right of way is just wrong in my opinion, and certainly not binding in the other direction, saying that you must not apply it there. It would not make any sense for the city to have an oceanfront setback, which in its intent and purpose provision talks about preserving views, to not apply in a right of way, such that as applicant seems to be suggesting, they have to keep their house and lot structures out of it, but they can build a 25-foot high flying bridge in the right of way that somehow complies with the code. Would be an absurd result, in my opinion. Similarly, something that staff didn't talk about in their staff report, but that you've heard applicant talk about somewhat this evening, is the removal of trees in the right of way. There's the proposal is to remove 17 trees from the development site, the lot, and the right of way here. And new in this round, something that's different than what was proposed before, applicants are proposing to remove the stumps and pull the stumps out from these 17 trees. The oceanfront setback, or the oceanfront overlay zone at 17.42.020.040, prohibits removal of stabilizing vegetation in the overlay. That's what it says. There is expert testimony in the record from ISA board certified master arborist, Austin Weinecke. It's attached to my latest submittal from July 7th, that analyzes and discusses how those mature spruce trees stabilize slopes in this context. And he attaches information from Washington State University talking about how the root systems of those trees and the drip lines of those trees help stabilize slopes. That's clear, it's in the record, and though that's a clear criterion, and the city should apply it. Similarly, there's tree code provisions that also apply here that staff don't really get into too much, and applicants tried to avoid. But regarding the tree protection zone in 17.70.030Q, as I believe council knows, the city code allows people to remove trees when it's in the footprint of development and when a driveway is in a footprint of development, and they have to be removed because of that. Trees that are not removed are supposed to be protected by a tree protection zone, and that zone has a clear and objective measurement for where it falls. This is a definition that I believe was added to the code in 2019 in 17.04.557. That tree protection zone applies to, and I quote, the TPZ tree protection zone is defined as a circle whose center is at the center of the subject tree and whose radius is 2 feet for each inch of trunk diameter, measured at 4 1/2 feet above grade level. It gives the example of an 8-inch tree having a 16-inch tree protection zone. There's supposed to be a fence up around that zone, and no excavation is allowed. Excavation is prohibited in that zone. Here, however, applicants propose to retain 2 border trees. And by border trees, I mean trees that are actually on, half on or partially on the applicant's lot and partially on my client's lot to the north. They propose to retain those trees because they have to. Under Oregon law, my client is a partial owner of those trees and can't be removed without my client's consent. Applicants propose a 60-inch deep excavation for their foundation, 4 feet south of those trees. Those trees are 15-inch and 24-inch diameter trees. They're large trees. They get winds with the storms that come through from the Pacific, just like all the other trees on that hillside. And the master arborist who assessed those trees concluded that those trees will fail if this project moves forward. That is not applying the tree protection zone or applying the tree code in the way that its plain language is supposed to be applied in this context. We think that's another basis that the city should deny these applications for. Basically, though, kind of in summary on the applying the code piece of this, Mr. Kvaisman concluded his report and said, geez, there appear to be 4 criteria that are not met here, and the city should deny based on those. I agree with him. He's right on those criteria. I would also add about 6 more that are in our written submittals that are additional criteria that create a valid basis to require denial of this application. I want to shift now, though, to the failure of applicants to meet documented geologic and traffic safety problems here. First, I want to start with geotechnical instability. There are 3 reports from geotechnical experts in the record that assessed this elevated driveway proposal, or that assessed an elevated driveway proposal, basically an attempt to be an at-grade driveway before today. The submittal today included some new information from Mr. Rondema, where he tries to justify that. Before that, the 3 geotechnical experts that assessed this all concluded that the city should not do an at-grade driveway because of risks associated with that. First, Earth Engineers, who was retained by applicants in the prior flying bridge proposal, the larger bridge application, concluded that it would not recommend building at grade because of potential destabilizing effects that adding that weight could have, and because of potential impacts on the dewatering system that exist on the site. They explained that the elevated proposal, the taller bridge, would avoid disturbing the natural slope and contours of the hillside and would avoid minimize removal of vegetation that helps stabilize the slope and would not interfere with existing drainage patterns. All of those things are now proposed as part of this elevated driveway. Second, and I would argue even more importantly, Tim Blackwood of Poly Consulting was hired by the city to assess the elevated driveway proposal. He warned the city explicitly against the risks posed by building over the crucial dewatering pipes that help stabilize this hillside. He submitted a report to the city on June 29th, which reiterates that neither the home nor the 2 road designs comply with the city's geologic hazard code. Specifically, Mr. Blackwood found that the proposed development would decrease the factor of safety, or FS, below applicable industry standards. I want to take a pause on this factor of safety issue in response to what Mr. Rondema spoke about earlier this evening. Factor of safety is something that's applied by cities across Oregon, across the United States, as far as I know, to try to make sure that developments in unstable areas don't pose risks to the development itself and to neighbors. Mr. Rondema talked about trying to get to a factor of safety of 1.3 for the subject house, for example, the smaller house proposed. That is something that matters a lot. There's 3 families that live on and above this S-curves landslide, and they go to sleep there every night with their family. And when they talk about, geez, can we get to a factor of safety of 1, not making it any worse, that and that they're aiming for 1.3 for their property, but not 1.3 factor of safety for the driveway attached to their property or for the abutting properties, that's not right. The code calls for a hazard assessment that applies to the subject site and to adjacent properties, nearby properties. That's in 17.50, and applicant just hasn't done that analysis as it relates to the neighboring properties. As Poly concluded, Tim Blackwood, it's not met. It's just not complied with. Haystack Rock, one of the family, an entity owned by one of the families that lives on that landslide, had their own independent geotechnical analysis done, and we submitted that in my last submittal. They concluded the exact same thing as Poly, independent of Poly, that the proposal does not address the deep-seated landslide here and does not address risks posed by the elevated driveway and should be denied. I really think this council wants to do the right thing in assessing this application. And there's the code-based right thing, and then there's the common sense public safety right thing. And fortunately, both those things align in this application. They both point to denial. And I really hope the council thinks long and hard about that and listens to the experts that it's retained and that members of the public have retained in making a decision and hopefully denying this application. I see I've got 1.5 minutes left of my time. I'm just going to take a brief pause before I conclude to create any space for any questions any counselors may have at this moment.
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so for my concluding remark, Mr. Rondema in this middle and Ms. Kellington talked about, oh geez, you're applying some different standard here regarding factor of safety than, for example, what was applied to some recent homes being built on Nazima, 132 and 124 Nazima. I'm not sure why they're highlighting those homes. They, at least from the GIS materials in the record and on the city's website, those two homes appear to be more than 100 feet east of the active landslide that we're talking about here. They do not appear to be in an active landslide zone. They appear to be on less sloped areas. So we're not asking that this standard, the city's geotechnical standards be applied everywhere, but we do expect that they will be applied on active landslides like at the S-curves. So in conclusion, for decades, Cannon Beach has required developers to comply with the city's code to get a permit. Nothing more, nothing less. This has served the city very well. It's enabled the city to maintain its village character and avoid undesired development patterns that are sometimes seen in other coastal communities. The city council should follow the lead of its predecessors, follow the counsel of its staff here and its engineering expertise here, and deny this application. The council can certainly entertain an application from applicants, and if they can put one forward that meets the code, great. But this one clearly does not meet several code criteria and therefore should be denied based on those applications. By upholding the access requirement, by upholding the tree code, by upholding the oceanfront setback, this council will be protecting what has made Cannon Beach such a special place. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Okay, are there other presentations by opponents in the audience? Okay, we're going to start at the back. Liz? Okay, I want to remind everyone in the audience that we're kind and respectful and listening, and same with the presenters. Thank you.
I have to speak loudly. I have a quiet voice. My name is Liz Scott. This is Andrea Suarez Kemp, and we're representing the Cannon Beach History Center and Museum, PO Box 1005, Cannon Beach, Oregon 97110. And we are going to read our letter of support and opposition. If that's okay. Sure. Okay. You want me to read it? Yes, please. Here's public speaking. Dear counselors, thank you for your service to Cannon Beach. This letter is submitted on behalf of the Cannon Beach History Center and Museum. We appreciate the vital role that you serve as stewards of our community, preserving its history and village character. As you may know, our museum was organized for the purpose of preserving the history of Cannon Beach and Arch Cape by seeking, collecting, and protecting historical memorabilia of all kinds, by recording oral histories, and by making these materials available to the public whenever possible. We invite you to come to visit the museum located at 1387 South Spruce Street on the corner of Spruce and Sunset in Cannon Beach, and strengthen your understanding of our shared local history. We write today in support of the Oswald West Cabin in opposition to the development proposed in DP number 2206. As you probably know, the Oswald West Cabin is the only historical site in Cannon Beach listed in the National Register of Historic Places. The forested character of the cabin property, abutting unimproved Nenana right-of-way and the lot now owned by the Robertses and proposed for development is of historical significance for the Oswald West Cabin and our identity as Oregonians. As noted in the National Register of Historic Places, it is clear that inspiration for the means by which further sale of Oregon tidelands to private ownership could be blocked had come to Governor West while he occupied his own summer retreat on what was then uninhabited shoreline. Others would soon discover the wonders of the Oregon coast. When West bought the property from Mark S. and Edna Warren on September 5th, 1911, he had his choice of the entire coast. This site, still intact for the most part, is dramatic and is made more so by the parcel of undeveloped land adjacent to the southwest corner of the holding. The hope is to preserve this most compelling part of coastline that served as West's inspiration and thereby to commemorate his far-reaching conservation initiative. The Oswald West Cabin has participated in and has been a highlight of the museum's Cannon Beach Cottage Tour in years past, with hundreds of members of the public touring the cabin. This is a popular event that is important to our community and is discussed in the record. The subject property has sat undeveloped for decades because of its geotechnical instability, lack of access, steep slopes, and a multitude of other restrictions applied by Cannon Beach Municipal Code. The developers seek to make an unbuildable lot buildable, remove significant trees in public right-of-way, and build a long elevated private driveway in the city's unimproved public right-of-way that fails to comply with the safety and public access requirements of CBMC 1750-40A, 1234-50, and 1236-30. We ask that you please deny the development proposed in DP number 2206 in order to preserve this one-of-a-kind historic location and uphold the code. At a minimum, the city should require the applicant to demonstrate safe, code-compliant access pursuant to CBMC 1790-20 and 1778-30A9 before authorizing any tree removal or development at this historically significant site. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this matter of great public concern and promote our shared history. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next in the back row. Is there anybody else? Oh, okay.
Hi, my name's Jack Clark, and my property is 263 Yukon, which is at the bottom of the S curves. And I think I might follow her lead and read what I had written as opposed to try and ad-lib this. And so I'll try to do that. And it's on my phone, so that doesn't help. So after reviewing the Roberts proposal to be granted an easement on the city right of way to build an elevated highway, I still believe that the issues and the risks are just as high as with the previous proposals. The proposal is basically no different than the other proposals and is still a very bad direction for the beachside development of Cannon Beach. It will negatively impact the character and the soul of our community. The city council should deny it. My reasons are as follows. The removal of mature trees and to build an elevated driveway to access the property in the pond will ruin the view of the beachside between Inspiration Point and Oswald West Log Cabin. Also, the removal of mature trees the removal of mature trees there is a very high risk in losing more trees during storms in windy areas. The more trees that you lose, the greater the risk to an area for landslides. A good example of that was about 20 years ago on Highway 26 between Sandy and Welch's, when they removed trees at the widening of the highway. In the first big storm, all the trees that were supported by those trees just fell over the highway. It also would impact the the view. The other thing about the intersection at the top of the Hemlock Curves, creating a new intersection at the top of the curves, I think is a very good idea. And the traffic engineer that was on the on Zoom mentioned there were several other areas where they applied signage. And one thing that's different about this particular intersection and the intersections that are also on the curves is that this intersection has a unique relationship to the sun in the afternoon. And it also has a unique relationship to one of the most spectacular views in Oregon, which is the view south from the top S curve down towards Stephanie Inn and that area. That's one of the most beautiful views in the state. So coming up those hills, the other signage that engineer mentioned, none of those other intersections have those issues. So part of what would happen is you would see someone coming up the hill, wrong time of day, be blinded by sunlight. They're not going to see any car that's coming off any intersection at the apex of the hill. The other problem is going southbound. I don't know about anybody else, but I always see that view. And that's where my attention is. And there are pedestrians walking on both sides of the road up there. I just think it creates a much bigger issue than you could just talk about and solve with signage. We live at the bottom of the curves, and we've had 4 accidents in the 12 years that we've been there. 3 of them went through our garden and caused a ton of damage. And so I can tell you that the signs that are down there on Hemlock as you approach the curves don't seem to do a lot of good for the wrong kind of driver. And so I think you'd just be increasing that risk at the top of the hill. So that pretty much summarizes my my opposition to the proposal. I believe if it were to go forward, it would have a significant impact on beauty and really the brand of Cannon Beach by destroying that view. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the back row? Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Diana Turner. My address is PO Box 211 Cannon Beach. Tonight I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of the Dunes at Cannon Beach, a grassroots group working to protect coastal scenic beauty, biodiversity, and recreational opportunities for residents and visitors alike. You'll be happy. I'm not going to read my letter to you. It's over 3 pages, so I promise this will be quick. Here we are again. Right? Another review of an incomplete, untenable, and wholly unsafe building permit application by the Roberts. I won't review all the reasons that this application cannot be approved. From code violations, especially the oceanfront setback and overlay rules that are dear to this group's heart, and the very real concern for public safety that adding an intersection at that location poses to this community, like the gentleman just detailed for us. We believe Haystack Rock LLCs and Orcas attorneys, along with the city's consultants, Windsor Engineering and Poly Consulting, your planning department, and the dozens of letters of opposition that you have received from your community have provided an unsurmountable mountain of reasons why this application cannot be approved. And even if the Roberts did finally decide to provide the missing information in their application, a permit still could not be approved, because what this years-long process has revealed is that this site is fundamentally unfit to support a residential structure and the needed road access. So, what's the most just way forward for the community and the Roberts? We believe that it's time to stop trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. The most honest and just approach would be for the city to affirm this is an unbuildable lot and offer to condemn it for the safety of all, including the Roberts, for today and into the future, for whoever the Roberts might find to sell this lot to. We encourage the city to pay the Roberts a fair market value for this unbuildable lot and finally put this ugly episode behind us. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the back row? Oh, okay. Okay, now we're gonna go up to the front row. Anybody in the front row like to speak?
No, we got.
Jan.
Jan.
I'm Jan Siebert Warman, and this very brief statement is also from my husband, Wes Warman. PO Box 778 Cannon Beach, 97110. Dear Mayor and City Councilors, we urge you to deny the Roberts application and to protect our community's oceanfront codes and our trees that protect us all now and hopefully into the future, especially with the climate change possibilities to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next.
My name is Kevin Newport, 4332 Southwest Summer Way, Portland, Oregon, 97221. I have also written a letter. It's D29. I'm not going to read them. I'm just going to take some bullet points from it. As a family member of the Oswald West Cabin and being here for the last 4 to 5 decades at the S-curves, I watch hundreds of people stop their cars up on Hemlock. I watch hundreds of people take videos and photo shots of Silver Cap and Jockey Point. I also see these same individuals go down Nenana Avenue, go down our property. And I would like to echo the earlier gentleman. We have also had cars, landscape companies roll over onto our property at the S-curves onto property in the last 2 years. Those aren't ticketed. Those aren't maybe in the public record because people just take care of them. They write a letter, they fix the damage and it goes on. So I don't think there was ever a write up for the record. So there's lots of accidents on Hemlock that don't get reported to the city for their records, but I would think the insurance companies would have plenty to say about the S-curves and Hemlock. But back to the people that come down our property about 4 years ago, the public works director put no parking signs on the west side of the S-curves at my request, from what I just shared earlier with all the people that come down our property. And you know, the tourists are looking to get to the beach. They're looking to figure out where can I take that special picture? And we even have a private driveway sign. We have a chain link little fence for our driveway. With all that signage daily, if we don't put our chain link fence up, we have people coming to the house thinking it's the post office, thinking it's a museum, thinking it's access to the beach. With what the Roberts are proposing, whether it's an elevated driveway, an unelevated at grade 10 feet above, this is an opportunity for the public to cause mayhem with Cannon Beach, the city specifically, with a structured road. They do it already without the road. The road's just going to make it that much easier. The problem with the road is, and I can't imagine being a homeowner having a road to my home that does not allow emergency vehicles. I mean, it just doesn't feel good, doesn't fit right. We're very concerned about the water standpipe and fire engine not being able to go down there. As everyone knows, in Cannon Beach, a house was burned down in 1991 by an arsonist. And we're very protective. We chose to rebuild the home as the historical home, and we are not looking to lose it for the wrong reasons. Again, we are on an active landslide. It moves every year. You can come to our property for a site inspection. We can show you some things that geologists don't know. That land is moving and has moved my entire life. So geologists probably haven't been there for 40 years, such as myself, or longer. And we just want the city to follow the codes, do the right thing, and deny this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Still with the front row.
My name is John Newport. My mailing address is 4300 Southwest Crestwood Avenue in Portland, Oregon. I'm a member of Haystack Rock LLC, owners of the Oswald West House, which was acquired originally in 1939. I was going to touch on three things: the staff report, access, and trees. Mr. Rasmussen covered trees very well, and I will not say much more about that other than to ask you to look at Attorney Alterman's comments in the record about interpretation of the tree removal provisions of your code. And he takes the position that, and apparently your planning commission has also taken that code provision should be interpreted to permit removal of trees only when required. If a house could be reasonably sited without tree removal, that should be required. So the requirement should be required, not desirable. That's all I'll say about trees. Ms. Kellington began with Mr. Adams' prior approval, and she relies on it quite heavily. To the effect of, well, not exactly. That's one of the reasons LUBA remanded this matter to the city, because there was no public notice given. Public was not given the opportunity to comment like they have now. And so you have a lot more evidence and argument than Mr. Adams allowed. We asked Mr. Adams to withdraw his decision. The city did not denied that request. LUBA remanded it. And so Mr. Adams didn't get it right. And the additional argument and evidence in the record that you're receiving is showing how he didn't get it right, including your staff report, which considers things Mr. Adams either ignored, overlooked, didn't address, but his decision did not get it right. And the current staff report, as Mr. Rasmussen says, it's a good start at it, but there are many more reasons why the application should be denied, and I won't touch on those because Mr. Rasmussen's submittals adequately, more than adequately covers them. But I want to address one matter, and that's access down Nenana. Nenana is an unimproved right-of-way, is not suitable for vehicular access. I'll remind the council that in 1993, predecessor council vacated Chena Avenue, which is about 150 feet to the north of Nenana, vacated Chena and found on the record that it was not suitable for vehicular access. That council didn't have before it expert reports that came to that conclusion. They applied their common sense. The topography of Chena is about the same as the topography of Nenana. You can apply your common sense and find that it is not suitable for vehicular access, regardless of the type of proposals that are before. Additional reasons they're not addressed in the staff report is that Haystack, because it owns lots 14 and 15 adjacent to lot 13, which is the applicants, we're to the east, lots 14 and 15 are to the east. Haystack owns to the middle of Nenana. And what's proposed is development on land that Haystack owns without having Haystack's consent. That's not acceptable. That's one of the reasons that we filed the lawsuit pending before the Clatsop County Circuit Court that's scheduled for trial in just a few months. That court will determine, we believe, that nobody can do anything in Nenana on the property adjacent to lots 14 and 15 without Haystack's consent. Furthermore, Ms. Kellington noted that Nenana is dedicated as a public thoroughfare forever. Public thoroughfare means just that it's available for access by the public. The proposed right-of-way structures, whether they be the elevated flying bridge or whether they be an elevated on-grade, would block public access down Nenana. It would destroy the thoroughfare aspect of Denana. And it would block our use, Haystack's right, to use that public thoroughfare for the driveway access being proposed is incompatible with the dedication of that right of way. And the last thing I want to say is that, as Kevin Newport commented, that that land does move. Mr. Rondema, to my knowledge, hasn't been on our property. But West built a stable for horses because he was a horseman. Now, the stable was considered by us a barn. That's where we stored wood. It was located on lot 14. Over the last several years, lot 14 has slumped towards the beach, making it impossible to use what was our wood shed for a woodshed. And so the barn is no longer there because you cannot access it, either getting wood in because of the high slump or getting wood out because of the high slump. And when we had it surveyed for perhaps rebuilding the barn, the surveyor said that the property had moved 5 feet to the west based on the survey stakes. So that ground is moving. And whether it's moving left where the dewatering pipes are, I don't have any evidence to contradict that, but I do have evidence that contradicts that lot 14 is not moving. So I would encourage the council to deny the application based on the comments of the public, Haystack's comments, and the other evidence in the record that shows this is just not compliant. Thank you.
Anybody else in the front row? Okay, now we're going to the third row. Anyone? Third row, like to make a comment? Come on, third row. You can do it.
My name is Kaya Hazard. I'll be giving comments on behalf of the Surfrider Foundation, which is a grassroots organization dedicated to the enjoyment and protection of our oceans, waves, and beaches. So I trust that you have already received written testimony from my colleague, Charlie Cliven. So I just wanted to comment on a few of those points from his letter. Obviously, Surfrider would be against any sort of hard structure on the beach within the oceanfront setback. The retaining wall in the proposal is against Surfrider's policies and would lead to erosion of the beach, which is a public resource. And the irony of this property being right next door to the Oswald West House, who believed that we should all be able to enjoy the beach without their public right, is ironic. As far as the tree code goes, the Cannon Beach Municipal Code 1770-015, the removal of the trees on the property as well as other stabilizing vegetation would worsen the active landslide activity that's already in that area, the S-curves, and lead to destabilization of that lot and others around it. And as climate change worsens and we experience more extreme weather events, this landslide risk will worsen as well, with all of those trees gone. So I think that I urge you to deny this proposal like the others that don't meet the code. And I thank you for the opportunity to give comment.
Thank you. Anyone else in the third row? Okay, is there anyone in the second row that would like to make public comment?
Like I'm batting cleanup. Mary Beth Cottle, PO Box 492, Cannon Beach 97110. I am speaking for myself. I agree with
all of the people who have spoken against this, the 17 trees that would be removed would absolutely destabilize the slope. I am a biologist. I do know what I'm talking about. The weight of the driveway and the road, you know, whatever we're going to call it, this access will increase the weight on that slope. It is going to have an effect on that slide. If we're talking about a left in, left out, or right in, right out for this road, for this access, for this property, that means that if they can only go right out of it, to go check their mail, they're going to drive down to Tolovana, go onto the highway, go back up and come on Sunset to go to the post office. If they go to Fresh Foods, when they come back, they're going to go onto the highway, go to Sunset and come back so they can turn into their property safely. I want to say that's not going to happen probably. People don't want to go out of their way to go where they're going to go. I'm going to raise the specter of liability in the city, because if there's an access point there and a car, however many cars are going in and out there, there have already been accidents. They will be worse. They will be more. Who is going to be liable for that? If the city has permitted this, will the city accept any liability for those accidents? If this building structure causes the slide to happen again, does the city accept liability for this slide? I'm sure that Haystack LLC would like to know that as well. I urge you to consider all aspects of this while you are deciding whether to permit or not permit this. And I'm hoping that you will come down on the side of no. I just think that it is not the best use of that space, and that it will not be a positive impact on that area. That is all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in that room? Okay, is there anyone online that would like to make public comment? If so, please, go ahead, Cameron.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't tell whether you can also see me or not. I guess not. But that's okay. Doesn't matter. My name is Cameron LaFollette. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon Coast Alliance, PO Box 857, Astoria. And I just want to say initially is that we agree with the critiques that have been presented against the Roberts House proposal as we know it in this iteration by Haystack Rock LLC. And I'm not going to go over the points that they have done in detail, but because we are a nonprofit organization focusing on the protection of coastal resources, I do want to stress that Oregon Coast Alliance opposes this project in good part because the developer proposes converting unimproved Nenana into a raised private driveway. And this right of way was dedicated to the public for its use, not for private use. The city needs to decide that the highest and best public use of this public resource, either preserving it as it is for potential future use or as a geotechnically safe at-grade footpath for accessing city-owned Inspiration Point. This proposal harms the public because it will both block public use and abutting lots. And in addition, which is harder to pin down, it's unsafe. Well, that's fairly easy to pin down. There's been a lot of discussion about the geotechnical matters with which we agree. And most important, it's non-compliant with multiple chapters of the Cannon Beach Municipal Code. we have to remember the basic thing that Oregon law requires, which is the burden of proof is on the applicant. And the major point here is that the applicant has not met their burden of proof. The driveway designs, for example, and plans required by code have not been provided. They have not provided detailed driveway designs. And despite being constructed or proposed to be constructed on steep slopes in an active map landslide and over dewatering pipes that are critical to the city's efforts to reduce landslide risk, the applicants have not provided required design information that would allow the city to see the details of what they are proposing. Both the dwelling and the driveway applications violate city code in multiple ways, which we detailed in our testimony, and I will not repeat. But I will stress that the violation of the fundamental requirement in state law that places the burden on the applicant to prove that the application meets city code and state law is a fundamental flaw in this application, as is their tendency or their decision to or their proposal to use public resources for private use. And we urge the city to deny this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Online, raise your hand if you want to speak. Okay. Okay, we have a request for a 1 minute break. Now I want to see that happen. Okay, we're timing. Okay, so next we have the question, is there a staff response?
I think, you know, there's a lot of testimony of a variety of different things. I don't think there's anything in particular that I heard, Steve.
An ad at this time.
Yeah, if you have any particular questions, Steve could respond or I could respond. Otherwise, I would suggest moving on to the applicant's rebuttal.
Does anyone have any questions?
Robert.
I do want to make one observation. This is regarding the Nazina property that was referenced earlier. As many of you know, the department does use paper records. Not all of our records are electronic. In the case of the supposedly missing geotechnical report of that property, that's incorrect. There is a paper copy available in the planning office. Unfortunately, we did not receive any record requests regarding that prior to this meeting. But I did want to point out that does exist. We did evaluate that property under the geotechnical code.
And that's for the 124th?
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, does the applicant wish to provide final rebuttal?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
I think that Wendy Killington again for the applicants, Becca and Stan Roberts. I think we'll start with our geotech person because I think most of the assertions that were made are in his wheelhouse to respond to. So Don, can you respond to those issues, please?
Certainly, Don Rodman again. I heard a lot that the actions and proposal will decrease the stability of the S-curves. It will not. I've studied it for over 20 years. I spent thousands of hours analyzing it. I have a master's degree in geotechnical engineering. Right. Flying to the Portland airport, I designed the foundation for the tower that guide the planes in. So I've been around the block. I understand safety and hazards. So no actions that we're proposing decrease stability, and the actions we propose on the lot increase the stability of not only the lot, but the abutting lots. Because if you increase strength in one area, it helps the abutting areas. It's really that simple. That as far as the Nazina lots not being in the S-curves, the roadway ruptured abutting those lots across the pavement in the 90s, which is what instigated the city doing investigations to try and reduce the disturbance there. So the assertion that the Nazina lots are not in the S curves, I would argue on a technical basis, certainly.
Thank you.
All right.
Anything else?
Yes. So you've heard a lot of things that are simply untrue, and I want to go through those with you. They're objectively verifiable, so you don't have to take one person's word or another. But I will tell you that the Roberts also love the city of Cannon Beach. They've been coming to the city for 35 years. It's their primary place of respite and enjoyment and joy. They decided they wanted to retire in the city of Cannon Beach, and they decided that they would love to build a very modest 1,200 square foot home that abuts a public right of way to make that dream a reality. And they too would ask you to faithfully apply your code and your laws, because if you do that, the Roberts proposal will be approved. Look, what you heard from all these people, I wouldn't approve a proposal that did all those bad things either. But the fact is those assertions are objectively false. So let's start with Mr. Rasmussen's claim that the quote unquote flying bridge was denied by the city council, by LUBA, and the Court of Appeals. Nothing could be further from the truth. And let's all remember that the thing that he likes to call the flying bridge is a road on the Nanana right-of-way that is built to city public road standards. That's what city public road standards yields. In your decision that he says you denied the quote unquote flying bridge, and so it is quote unquote absolutely not an option anymore, on the very first page, you said, quote, specifically, the city is still reviewing proposed improvements to the abutting Nanana right-of-way. The city has not approved or denied those requested improvements, and they are not the subject of the application, which relates only to the property, the Roberts lot. And in fact, the caption of that approval is a denial of a residence. The very last page of your decision says, however, review of any roadway in Nanana Avenue is the subject of a different review and is not implicated in this limited review of only the structure proposed. And so, yes, please faithfully apply your code, but also please faithfully apply the decisions that you've made in the past and that your professional staff have made in the past, which are that the city council has never denied the road built to public standards. And in fact, Exhibit 4 of the materials I submitted to you is an email correspondence from your Public Works Director, Ms. Labonte, to Mr. Roberts that says, please find the attached, the final sign off from the engineers on the latest version of the Nanana Road plans. That's from October 26, 2020. The plain fact is that the public road of Nanana has been approved as meeting all of your technical standards. And remember, a right-of-way is not a lot, so the Ocean Yard provisions do not apply. And the only issue is whether the council would prefer to approve instead of the public road that meets all of your standards. Instead of that, it would prefer a driveway access that is not as intrusive looking. There also should be no dispute on this record, as Mr. Rondema just reinforced, that The factor of safety for the Roberts proposed very small home, 1,200 square feet, contrasted with its neighbor's 4,300 square foot quote unquote cabin, is better than it is currently. That when they put in their impressive and stout foundation system for that little house, that it will not only reach the factor of safety that your consulting engineer says is acceptable, but it will also help to stabilize the properties around it. And there's really no evidence otherwise. The strange interpretation of your code that is advanced now, that has never been advanced before, and certainly was not advanced or approved by the city for 124 Nazina, is that not only does the factor of safety need to reach this, kind of 1.3 for the Roberts house, but now the factor of safety for the improvement to Nenana, and maybe the house, I can't tell, needs to stabilize completely the landslide for not only Nenana and not only the Roberts tiny house, but everybody else around them. And I can promise you that that is not the interpretation of the factor of safety and the acceptable minimization of a hazard that the city applied to 124 Nazina. And yes, I would like to see any analysis or if there was a site investigation that was done for that property, because I am certain that it didn't do what is being demanded of the Roberts, because if it did, the Roberts would be home free because their quote unquote landslide would be solved by 124 Nazina. And we all know that isn't the case. In addition, last year, Pali took the position that in its recommendation at our Exhibit 7, page 4, that the driveway should be constructed to result in no net decrease in the factor of safety. And the only evidence in the record is that the factor of safety for the driveway will have no net decrease. And that's what Pali said they wanted. Now, the only difference is they want not only that, but they want the driveway to stabilize the entire landslide for everybody, which is impossible for it to achieve, or for anybody to achieve, because you'd have to do mitigation on property that you don't own. So that's not an interpretation that the city has ever accepted before. It's not an interpretation the city has ever applied before, and it's not an interpretation that it's appropriate to apply here, because it dramatically changes everything that's gone before for all the reasons I discussed earlier. The idea that you were given that Nenana can't be a street, again, all you have to do to answer that inquiry is just read your definition. It just means the entire width between right-of-way lines for every way for vehicular and pedestrian traffic. It includes a road, a highway, all these things. Nenana is clearly that. And Mr. Newport's claim that he doesn't like the idea of the driveway, or I guess the road either, but he doesn't like the driveway because that's going to cut off public access, is absolutely false. As Mr. Adams testified in his deposition on behalf of the city, and as your own easement that your attorney has drafted for you, if you choose to do the driveway option, all that it does is provides the Roberts with a temporary easement that the city can revoke at any time. It is non-exclusive. There's no dispute about that. Non-exclusive. That means not just Roberts, anybody else who the city wants to let use it can use it. So again, it's false that if you allow a private driveway under this easement, that will exclude anyone else. It does not. The staff has found over and over and over again that the Roberts proposal meets all of the terms of your tree code. If the standard is what Mr. Alterman wants, that it's necessary to remove the trees, it's necessary to remove the trees. There's a tree report again for 124 Nazina that says I need to remove the trees to build my house. Well, the trees here have to be removed to provide access over the Nanana right of way. That benefits everybody, the public, and that benefits the city to get to its pipes. And it also benefits the Roberts because their access will work better and more safely for themselves and everyone else around them. And so whatever the standard is in the tree code, the city's staff and the professional and consultants involved have explained that they are met. And if the standard were to be interpreted to be even stricter, to require that it's necessary to move the trees, well, it's certainly necessary in order to have access and for a very tiny house of 1,200 square feet to be built. I think Mr. Rasmussen was mistaken. He said 3 different times that Mr. Kabizman recommended denial. Mr. Kabizman has done no such thing. It's Mr. Sokolowski that has come up with these 4 new bases for denial, not your city attorney. There were some statements made that the establishment of the Roberts home on their residential subdivision lot somehow threatens the Newport's cabin. The reality of that is that there's no such thing. It was actually relatives of the owners of the Newport's cabin that sold the property to the Roberts that they now own and want to develop their house on. And how can there be a threat to anyone to have a residential subdivision lot be developed with somebody's home and the access to it? The idea is a little disingenuous, and I don't think you want to head down that road or you're interpreting your code that just because an opposing neighbor doesn't really like the idea of having a neighbor, that's somehow a basis for the city to deny residential development. There was also a statement by Mr. John Newport that Luba's remand was on bases that went well beyond process. And of course, that's false. Luba's remand was limited to saying that the city is required to provide notice and an opportunity for surrounding property owners, i.e. the Newports, to file an appeal and to seek review. We participated in that appeal, but we, on behalf of the Roberts, didn't object to that determination because we had no idea the city didn't provide notice or of the city's approval. It was a shock to us as well, but Luba's remand is a very limited one, and it is limited only to providing this process that you're providing right now. This idea that, I mean, it's a pretty weird one. The idea that Haystack really owns the right of way that abuts it, and I guess every property owner that abuts right of way in the state of Oregon really owns the underlying right of way to the center line, is a pretty novel interpretation. It's pretty outrageous, really. Can you imagine a circuit court deciding that all the cities and all the counties and ODOT throughout the state's going to need a landowner's permission before it can go about making improvements to road right of way that's been dedicated to the public for road improvements? You know, the Haystack LLC has filed that lawsuit and made the city a defendant, and us, the Roberts, a defendant. We're going to defend it, but I don't think that the city should adopt a rule for itself that adjoining property owners have the ability to stop road improvements they don't like on the idea that they really own the underlying property. So with that, I think it makes sense, given all of this stuff that people have said that is simply untrue, that I ask that the record remain open for a period of a minimum of 7 days. And that be followed by a response period of 7 days, and the applicant has the opportunity for a final written argument. So that we have the opportunity to set right so many of these things that were said that are absolutely false, and to put it in writing so that you can touch it and feel it and understand it when you go to make your final decision. So in the absence of any other questions, that ends my rebuttal with the caveat that I plan to, I have asked for that quote unquote 777. And if you want to make it 14, 14, 14, I think that's okay, if that's better for you, but I asked for the 777. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to close the public hearing and move to consideration.
So as the applicant attorney indicated, they have requested that the record be left open. This gives the council two options under state statute. One is to continue to a date certain or to leave the record open as the applicant's attorney indicated. I think in the past, more with the planning commission, and I don't think you've held initial evidentiary hearings before, they found that the 777 works fairly well that way. You have time to review all the evidence before you come back and have deliberations and meet. So if that's the way the council is inclined, let me just set out the rules to make sure everybody is on the same page, and then we can talk about it. So what that would mean is that everybody would have, any party, including people who aren't here, would have the ability to submit any additional written evidence, arguments, or testimony. So essentially anything they want for 7 days or until next Monday, the 17th, is that right? At 5 p.m. At that point, anybody has an additional 7 days until Monday, July 24th to submit, let me make sure I get this right, to submit additional written evidence, arguments, and testimony solely for the purpose of responding to the new written evidence, what came in that 7 day period. And then finally, after the 5 o'clock on July 24th, the applicant and the applicant only would have the ability to submit final written argument until July 31st at 5 p.m. And that would be limited to argument, no new evidence or testimony. If I guess what probably makes sense is a motion to keep the record open as described.
I move to keep the record open in the 777.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, roll call, Tessa, please.
Counselor Hayes,
Yes.
Counselor Kirk,
Yes.
Counselor Ogilvy,
Yes.
President Murphy,
Yes.
Mayor Knopf.
Yes.
Okay, and so that would take care of the testimony until August 31st. And then we would have to come back for deliberation.
July 3rd.
July. Yeah, doing that. I apologize.
It's going by fast enough.
Yeah. So August 31st, I believe,
July.
Christmas, July 30th. Next date is going to be August.
Right.
The city reporter has indicated that you have availability on the evening of August 9th.
Right.
We would have deliberations for you to have a chance over the next month to absorb the information you got tonight, as well as the additional information, and provide direction to staff. And then at that meeting at 6 o'clock on August 9th, and then we would bring that back to you, bring a set of findings back to you for adoption.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions for anyone? Okay, is there anything for good of the order?
Coffee with the counselors next Monday at 10 o'clock.
Okay. I would like to thank all of our speakers tonight and the audience for conducting yourselves in a kind and respectful manner, as we like to do in Cannon Beach. And stay tuned. Thank you. Anybody else have anything?